Welcome back, WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and WNST.net. Yes, I am wearing last year's Chicken Palooza shirt here. I got to get the new green one that I saw on the way to the beach. But it's been a beach for Luke Jones. It has been a beach for me, although I've been here working on Baltimore Positive, and we've been in Catonsville and downtown and other places. And lo and behold, Luke, I had my first viral crab video, during our absence. But here we are, man. Training camp, it's real. It's Lamar Jackson. It's John Harbaugh. It's really a new look. And, I sense amongst the fan base that there is a piqued interest and a curiosity about this team that doesn't have Suggs, that doesn't have Weddle, that doesn't have Flacco, all of these sort of missing components to say, hey, let me learn a little bit more about this Matt Judon guy, and I wonder if this Marlon Humphrey guy is going to be everything that McAllister was supposed to be and go to the Hall of Fame. And all of this on the backdrop of Ed Reed going to the Hall of Fame next week, right?
Well, there's no question. I think there's so much curiosity, skepticism, unknown, however you want to characterize it, whether you're all in on this new era of Ravens football or you're very skeptical that what the Ravens are going to try to do offensively and what the change that they've undergone with their defense, what that's going to mean. I think it's going to be very, very interesting. The thing that I've been saying a lot to people in my world that have asked me what I've thought about the Ravens is, I think what's fascinating is there's just so much more variance this year. I think you could argue, and I'm making an argument here, that the Ravens have more upside than they've had in some time because of how much youth they have, because of the speed that they have on both sides of the ball. But at the same time, because there is youth, because there's unproven talent, I think the Ravens also have a lower floor than they've had in recent years. So what does that mean? You have a team that, if everything breaks right and young guys emerge, Lamar Jackson takes the steps forward that the Ravens are hoping he will take, some of the young guys step up on defense to fill the voids of some pretty important veterans that you noted, then this could be an 11-win football team that's in contention for a bye and repeating as AFC North champion. But if some of these young guys don't step forward, you don't see much improvement from Lamar Jackson from last year. They get some injuries that they didn't have last year. Keep in mind how healthy they were last year. Then this could be a 6-10 football team, and teams figure out their run-heavy offense, and their defense doesn't have as good of a pass rush and has some issues up front, and their secondary's hung out to dry a little bit more, even though it's an incredibly talented group. So we can, and you can do this every year to some extent, but I think the Ravens were very much a known commodity the last 4 or 5 years. And also remember, it wasn't a particularly good commodity. It was solid. It was in playoff contention, but it wasn't a team that was where they were, say, from 2008 through 2012. So I think that's where, as a fan, you embrace some change while tipping your cap to some of the guys who've walked out the door. But I think there's plenty of excitement to see how exactly this is going to play out. And whether it's a boom or it's a bust, I think it's going to be really interesting to watch.
Well, I tell you what, the kickoff of all of this is, here's the roster, here are the numbers, who are some of these guys, right? And that unto itself leads itself to, if you are in as a fan, you want to know who's replacing Terrell Suggs. What are they going to do about the middle of the defense and, Peanut taking over for C.J. Mosley, and how's that going to go? And who's actually going to be running the ball in this backfield? And the one thing that I've seen here in this offseason is bringing in these veteran players on the backside of losing, just unlike any offseason we've ever seen here, is bringing in Earl Thomas and seeing him step up to the podium, so to speak. But more than that, Mark Ingram, who really feels like a grown-up in the offense here, that they've at least brought in sort of that Shannon Sharp, Ben Watson, sort of veteran Derek May. They've had a whole bunch of these guys. But this guy specifically for the position he's going to play and trying to understand this offense and being a little bit of a safety valve for Lamar Jackson, a guy who can block a little bit, a guy that reads defenses better than probably anybody this side of, any 32, 34-year-old Woodhead or Sproul, who I saw, Sproles has another year in Philadelphia now, seeing the field like that, bringing a guy like that in, that's going to go under the radar because he's not going to lead the league in rushing, right? He's not going to be the star player on the team and, rush for 18. It's not going to be that guy, but he's going to be an important guy, I think.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question about that. I mean, you don't give Mark Ingram the contract that the Ravens gave him. And not that it's lucrative money, but it was some real money. And in this day and age with running backs, when you're seeing the likes of Melvin Gordon holding out and Zeke Elliott wanting a new deal, et cetera, I mean, we just know that very few running backs are paid in this day and age. And even the one who was paid recently, Todd Gurley, see how that's gone with him with the Rams. So not that Mark Ingram's going to have to carry the ball 300 times. I am not sure he's even going to rush for 1,000 yards, but I do think he's going to be the primary guy, with no disrespect intended to Gus Edwards or Kenneth Dixon or Justice Hill or whoever might end up running the football for the Ravens here in 2019. But they brought in Mark Ingram to the point that you made, to be a little bit of a grown-up, not just for the running back position, but for the offense as a whole. I mean, it's one thing to talk about some of these veterans walking out the door and saying that they're not the same player that they used to be, and we can't justify paying them as much as they were scheduled to make, but you still miss that leadership. And yeah, you want young guys to emerge, and you're going to need young guys to emerge, but you need at least a couple placeholders here and there of some older guys that are going to step in. And the thing about Mark Ingram, first of all, he's a pretty darn good football player. If you look at his numbers in New Orleans, he's always been part of a timeshare, so he's never had that monster 1,300, 1,400-yard season that you typically equate with a Pro Bowl-type running back, although not as much as you used to in this day and age. But he was known for being a good locker room guy, a good veteran presence, and I think he's one of those guys, and you mentioned Earl Thomas as well, although he's a little bit more of a lead-by-example kind of guy, seems to be a little bit quieter, but Mark Ingram's going to be a guy that I think, maybe not outspoken being the right word, but he's going to be a guy that will lead.
Dude, he's going to be the guy at the locker when they get their ass kicked, which they will at some point during the year, standing there and putting a brave face on it. It's very clear he's going to be that guy.
Yeah,
the way Eric Weddle was to some degree, right?
Sure. And, I mean, it's one thing to talk about the defense where they do have some veteran players, certainly, maybe not as many as they've been accustomed to having, but you look at that offense, other than Marshall Yanda up front and some veteran wide receivers who are either newcomers or a guy like Willie Snead who's only been around for a year, they don't have much veteran experience on the offensive side at all. I mean, like I said, Yanda...
Well, there's nothing to recommend then. That's why we don't think they're going to win 13 games, and if you do, it's going to be because they find some Rams lightning in a bottle, literally, or whatever they had last year, which was lightning in a bottle, right? If they have that again, just running and throwing and nobody can catch the kid, and he throws the ball better and makes better decisions, and they block it up, and they have better players, and, Hollywood gets a hold of the ball, and, next thing you know, you look up, he's got 3 receptions for 148 yards and 2 touchdowns because nobody can catch him, right? So if that's where they are, they'll win a lot of games. But there's nothing to look at this and say they have a 4,000-yard passer and a 2,000-yard rusher and, weapons everywhere and proven guy. They don't have any of that, right? So that's why we're looking at this and saying, we don't know that they suck, like the Orioles as an example, right? I mean, just looking at them and saying they can't be any good. I don't think we look at the Ravens and say they can't be any good, but I think there's an interesting concoction that I think John Harbaugh and the organization are going to be selling every step of the way because, I'm going to say it a lot, and my Smokey and the Bandit, affliction. It ain't ever been done because we ain't never done it. You know what I mean? No one's ever done it this way, so therefore we're all sitting here and saying Bill Walsh wouldn't approve of this, right?
Yeah, but at the same time, the whole point of trying to win in the NFL or, any sport where you're talking about matchups is to try to do something that your opponent's not going to be prepared for. Sure. And so I think that's where I do respect what they're trying to do. I'm intrigued by what they're trying to do. I don't know if it's going to work. I'm not smart enough to figure that out. But I do know in this day and age, you have defenses that are absolutely catered towards stopping the pass. I mean, it's just the reality. I mean, we spend so much time talking about the Ravens having a base 3-4 defense or so-and-so having a base 4-3 defense. That's not the base defense anymore. It's the nickel package. And even in the case of the Chargers last year, it's even the dime package.
It's fantastic, right? Like if you were a kid learning football at 10 years of age I'll date myself and say something stupid like Sega Genesis or Atari, right? But, in my vernacular, that if you were learning the game now, it was always learned, and because of football cards too, right? And because of the 1970s, there are 2 defensive tackles, 2 defensive ends, there are 3 linebackers, one's a middle linebacker. There was no wheel, Sam, any of that. It was middle, outside, left, right, and then there were 2 safeties and 2 cornerbacks, and that was a defense, and they all looked the same, and they worked that way on the on those magnetic boards, when you put the players down as to where to put them, and on every blackboard you ever see Lombardi on the X's and O's, it's kind of drawn up that way, to look that way, because it wasn't, we're going to drop 2 extra defensive backs in and, pull Butkus off the field because he doesn't drop back.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot different now. I mean, that's why there's been so much discussion about Michael Pierce and, not even talking about what happened at minicamp, although he passed his conditioning test. He's ready to go for the start of camp. I think there's still a sense of him getting in a little better shape, but he's certainly way better off than he was before. But so much talk about him and his contract year, Brandon Williams the last couple of years since he was paid. But you look at those guys, I mean, they're not on the field a ton. I mean, there's a rotation on the defensive line, and to the point you just made, kind of spelling out what a defense used to look like, now it's much more a case of you have 2 edge rushers in there, might be a defensive end, might be a rush linebacker, might be a Sam linebacker, but 2 guys that are dropping their hand in the dirt or at least lining up as an edge defender. You have a bulkier defensive tackle and probably a 5-technique defensive end with some size and some length where he's going to reach up and bat a pass down. You have 2 linebackers, one being the middle guy and the other being a guy that's probably going to be decent in coverage. And then you have a nickel. I mean, we've spent time talking about Tavon Young and the big contract he got back in March, but that was a big reminder that, slot corners are a starter in the defense now. I mean, that's just
he's going to be on the field 85 to 90% of the snaps, literally, right?
That's just the reality. So how you look at defense, and to bring me back to the point, because we were talking about Lamar Jackson and the offense, when you have one less guy, one fewer guy up front, a smaller guy replacing, whether it's a 300-pound defensive tackle or a 280-pound defensive end or whoever's coming off the field, then you have a smaller front there. And as much as we've kind of used the term front 7, it's really become a front 6, Nestor. I mean, if we're really going to look at this literally as far as where football is in 2019, it's more of a front 6. So the point is that the Ravens are trying to exploit that a little bit, and I think you've seen their focus on tight ends and some of the physical matchups you can have there, as long as you have tight ends on the field who can run. And when you have a quarterback who puts the pressure on a defense in the way that Lamar Jackson can as a runner, and acknowledging he needs to develop more as a passer, I think we all agree with that. But you are putting a heck of a lot of pressure on a defense to account for everything that a team can potentially run. I mean, when you have a quarterback like Joe Flacco or Tom Brady or anyone like that, they're not taking off and running. So right away, the defense is approaching it differently. So it needs to evolve. It needs to grow. It needs to expand from where it was over the final 7 weeks last year. And I think maybe the Chargers didn't have the perfect blueprint, but I think it was a reminder that, that offensive approach can be stopped. So it was a case of expanding that this offseason, and they added more speed, and it's really going to be fascinating to see how this plays out. To your point, we've never seen this happen, but at the same time, when Bill Walsh was doing his thing with the Bengals and then the 49ers, of course, I mean, there was lots of skepticism about that style of offense and how quarterbacks of the 60s and 70s trying to function in that kind of an offense probably wouldn't have worked out very well. So you never see change until someone's willing to experiment. And yeah, there'll be some failure with that, but there'll also be some success. And I think there's some at least quiet confidence within the building that the Ravens think they might have something here. And the last 7 games were a test run of that, and now we're going to see it fully functional as far as an offense completely designed around a really mobile quarterback. And while I think in a perfect world they don't want Lamar Jackson running 20-plus times a game, I also don't think they want to take away what makes him special, what makes him unique. And at the very least, they want to maintain that appearance that he could take off and run on any single play. And I think the Ravens are really going to try to use that to their advantage. And another reason why they brought in a Mark Ingram and they drafted a Justice Hill to a backfield that was pretty darn effective down the stretch last year.
Luke Jones is here. He is, of course, Luke at WNST.net. I'm going to stretch it out here and do a little bit of plugging for, and thanks to everyone who participated and threw me notes during our Hall of Fame month. We have an incredible week leading up to Ed Reed. I want to just throw it out there. It's some of the best work of my career. Most of it's never been heard before. All of it Hall of Fame work. Chats with Art Donovan that have never run. Chats with Art Modell that have never run. But more than that, the entire alphabet of the Hall of Fame, beginning with Ray Lewis and John Ogden and Rod Woodson and Shannon Sharp and all the way through. And if you think you've heard some of that stuff before, I would tell you you haven't, because I've mixed in 20 conversations with John Ogden you're going to hear next week that I've never aired since the night they actually played. Not to mention Ed Reed and his accomplishments. So it's a big week around here. All of our WNST support in Baltimore Positive. We're over in Catonsville. We're at State Fair. We're at Jennings Cafe. Make sure you check us out with Johnny O. If you missed any part of our incredible work with Matthew Gallagher, make sure you're checking that out at Baltimore Positive. Ben Carden coming up. Ben Jealous coming up. Lots of things. Paul Taberzi joining us next week. We're going to talk about the future of the Baltimore Orioles, as well as the Ravens upgrades to their stadium and arena talk and all that with Paul Taberzi next week. All of our WNST coverage brought to you by our friends at Charles Newsonoff and Sons in Parkville. I'm going to do a little roll call because I got complaints we played too many ads last month amidst conversations with Geddy Lee and Billy Joel and John Bon Jovi and Mike Messina and Cal Ripken and Earl Weaver and Brooks Robinson. But Charles Newsonoff and Sons been with us. By the way, there were ads with Sydney from like 15 years ago and chats with John Ogden. So if you hear any of the John Ogden stuff, you'll hear plugs for Charles Newsonoff and Sons. Full Circle. We trust David Full Circle. He's been taking care of my nasty van a million years ago. Still taking care of us up in Harford County. They are there all summer long on North Fountain Green Road in Bel Air. 410-676-CARS. Shout out to our friends as well up in Harford County at Adams Extreme Motorsports. Galen up there selling Jeeps. Stacking them deep. AdamsJeep.com. We'll be doing some shows up there as well in Aberdeen. Luke, I want to talk about something not about the football field, but about the process of football. And we had an opportunity to hear from John Harbaugh earlier in the week, hear from some of the veteran players as they check in. And, I think for Harbaugh, he has an expression about clean water running, and boy, it feels different with energy with DeCosta and Harbaugh now, right? And Lamar. And Harbaugh has chameleoned into this, right? Like with Roman and with Wink and with guys who don't appear to be on the cusp of getting a head coaching job, that this thing may be held together for a little while here. We've talked about the young players. But none of these guys know from Westminster, right? None of these guys know from Billick. None of these guys know from, some of these guys don't know from Ozzie, quite frankly, as soon, that these things get flushed over. These guys don't know from a ring in 2013 or Joe Flacco. It feels like a long way away. It feels like sort of a new day, new program. And there is something about that, and even for the fans going out there needing a scorecard and all of that, that this is the time where every day there's a young player that John is going to mention in the postgame, or you're going to say, hey, that kid flashed out there today, or hey, Tavon looks even better than advertised, or hey, Michael Pierce looks fat, or whatever it is, right? Whatever that thing that is going to be said. But you're going to be hearing about names and players, and I'm going to be on you every day saying, hey, who's the next Priest Holmes that's going to make this team, or I'm just naming undrafted free agents, Will Demps, where these guys come from nowhere to become players. And I guess that's why you're out there sweating it out the next 2 or 3 weeks, right? To see who is going to make a separation, because on this team, boy, their job's all over the field, kind of, sort of, if you can do this, right?
Yeah, I think... I don't think it's a brand new team. It's so much in that sense, although you'll always have some guys that surprise, and you'll always have a couple guys that underwhelm, whether they're not in great shape or they're just, they've gotten older, whatever it might be. But it's clearly a team that's pivoted from the old guard. I think, we haven't seen this much change with the roster since at least post-2014, and really I go back to Super Bowl 47, right after that, when Ray Lewis retires, Ed Reed goes and runs around for the Houston Texans and New York Jets for one more season, Matt Burke, Anquan Bolden. You're talking about some guys that had been there forever, and some guys who had been there maybe not quite as long but had made such an impact. And that's really the group that you're talking about. The Ravens don't have Joe Flacco in their quarterback room for the first time since Brian Billick was head coach and George W. Bush was president. That's how long it's been since they haven't had a Joe Flacco in the quarterback room. Terrell Suggs, you have to go back to 2002. These are some really, these were cornerstone players for you for a long time, and that's not even counting someone like a Weddle, who really acclimated himself quite well and was a big part of what they did, C.J. Mosley. So there is a sense of this being a new era, and there is unknown, and I think there's an intrigue to this, whether you're on the more skeptical side or whether you're all in on Lamar Jackson being a star in this league. But it's much more than just him, and I think there is plenty of interest to see how this is all going to play out. And I thought you made an interesting point about John Harbaugh, kind of talking about him, how he's bought into this and chameleoned into this. It's pretty amazing, isn't it, that we were talking about in November and even December about his future, and they make it to the playoffs. Don't even win a playoff game, but it's very clear that they've kind of reset. And he's part of that reset, and he's embraced that. And they have a coaching staff that is all in on trying to do things a different way on both sides of the ball. We've spent so much time talking about the offense, but they didn't replace C.J. Mosley with some free agent signing or a first-round pick. They didn't replace Terrell Suggs with a first-round pick. They have some younger guys, and they have some veteran kind of placeholder reclamation project types, but they're very clearly going into this with a strong secondary, which is an analytics kind of model as far as how to build a defense in 2019. So it's all very interesting, but I understand anyone looking at this and saying, well, is this really going to work? Because I think even... Oh,
I'm wondering, is this really going to work?
I
mean there's no doubt about that.
If you give members of the organization even some truth serum, or you have a few glasses of wine with someone, I think they would be honest in saying, yeah, there's some unknown to this, and this might not work out. And who knows? If Lamar Jackson gets hurt and some of these other young guys don't step forward over the next couple of years, we might be starting over in 3 years and drafting another quarterback. And who knows what that could mean as far as for front office and coaching staff types. So there is unknown, but I think there's a lot of conviction. I think that's the point you were making. There's a lot of conviction, and it definitely is a different culture. And I think there's been some made about that you have a lot of team guys. It's cohesive. There's no egos. Well, I think that's been the case for a while now. I mean, it's not as though, even Terrell Suggs had really mellowed out from what he was earlier in his career as kind of the clown prince of the group.
Even though I won't miss him a whit.
Yeah.
I saw how happy he was in Phoenix. I should have posted a video how happy I was at Owings Mills.
But my point is, I think that part of the narrative might be overblown if anyone's trying to talk that up too much. I think Harbaugh's had, quote, his type of guys in there for a while now. And I'm not saying that in a disparaging way. I just think it's pretty clear the locker room has changed dramatically from where it was 10 years ago to where it is now. But I think you definitely have people who are bought into doing things a little bit of a different way. And it's going to be really interesting to see how it works. I'm intrigued to kind of track it day by day. Not that training camp brings a profound revelation every single day, but yeah, you do want to see how this passing game, for whatever it's going to be, however many times they pass, how does Lamar Jackson fare against what very well could be the best secondary in the NFL, certainly the deepest secondary in the NFL. So I think it does become a really interesting litmus test, and one that we didn't necessarily see a whole lot of last summer. We saw Jackson practicing, but he was going up against the second team or the third team defense. We saw Joe Flacco getting all the first team reps. So I think in this setting, we saw a little bit of this in the spring for 5 or 6 practices that are open to media, but just the day-to-day growth or the day-to-day struggles of either side of the ball, you're always looking to see that. And as I said, I think Lamar's going to get a heck of a test from this secondary. So if you can see him manage to make some plays and you can see some of the receivers manage to make at least some plays against this secondary, then that's where you get into a case of he's going to be really, really well prepared. If you can make some plays against this defense going into the regular season, then I think expectations will only get a little bit higher. But, it's unknown, but as Buck Showalter used to always say when he was manager of the Orioles, if we knew what was going to happen, it would be really boring. So it's certainly not going to be boring, whether you're all in and optimistic about this or whether you're a little more skeptical that this revolution that the Ravens are kind of championing, that it's going to work out.
Revolution! I feel like Che Nestor Aparicio. By the way, what is this Buck Showalter Orioles you speak of? What? Oh, that's right. They still play baseball. You go sometimes. They play and stay up late. Anything you want to throw in on Oriole baseball here other than it is, that they played some better baseball the last 2 weeks, literally?
Well, I was just going to say they've played a little bit better over the last 3.5 weeks, really from the time I went on vacation. Go figure. They just needed me to not be watching their games. But, hey, minor leagues are still looking good. Adley Rutschman getting ready to make his debut for Aberdeen. He's been playing in the Gulf Coast League. So, they've had some young pitchers do some really good things down below. So, the cupboard's not bare. We've talked about that. But at the major league level, it kind of is what it is. I mean, John Means and, Asher Wojciechowski had a really nice start recently, but not a whole lot to speak of. And because of the way that they have played over the last 3.5 weeks and because of how the Detroit Tigers have played so poorly, there's quite the competition right now between the Orioles and the Tigers for the number 1 pick. And a lot of the peripherals would tell you the Tigers might even be the favorite for that. But if the Orioles make some trades between now and the deadline, in addition to the Cashner move, that might change. But not a whole lot to say beyond that, certainly at the major league level, that's for sure.
All right, well, Luke will be at the ballpark. He will be sweating it out with John Harbaugh, Lamar Jackson. I will be in and out of Owings Mills. We are Baltimore Positiving. You can check out all of the great stuff we're doing there. And I'm working hard. We got a lot of rock and roll last week out in the BuyAToyota.com Audio Vault, as well as baseball stuff. This week, it's all Hall of Fame as we get ready to welcome Ed Reed into Canton Hall of of Fame. I'll be back on the grid full-time next week around here. You can always find me, Nasty, at WNST.net. I have been a very, very active, nostalgia soul in my lack of vacationing, although I did spend 48 glorious hours in Ocean City, hon. Nasty at WNST.net, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram. Support our sponsors. Get on out and support Baltimore Positive. Enjoy the summer. Go watch my crab video and figure out how easy it can be at Al's or Costas or Fadley's or anywhere else. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 at WNST. Towson, Baltimore. We never stop talking Baltimore sports.